Here's a guy who thinks we have free will in heaven, despite the fact that we use our supposed free will to sin on earth, but heaven is somehow sin-free.
Will we have free will in heaven?
Well, we don't really have free will right now. There doesn't seem to be anything the brain does that looks at all like it's non-deterministic. There are no neurological functions, certainly none that seem at all to be involved in decision-making, that look like they have any element of spontaneity or randomness. It also doesn't look like there is any intervention of any agent like a soul that operates independent of the brain.
Yes. The end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay, seriously, let's engage with this question. First, what's the problem here? Well, perhaps the strongest argument for atheism is the problem of evil. If God exists, why is there so much evil? Now, however a Christian answers this, the answer usually involves a reference to free will.
Which doesn't really let God off the hook for the existence of behavior that he supposedly opposes and has the power to stop. Apologists will say that the reason God allows us to do things that he doesn't want us to do is because he wants us to have free will, as though free will is so awesome that it justifies allowing people to do all the horrible things they do. I've never understood why this is supposedly the case. Why is free will better than moral infallibility? I don't believe that I have free will in the first place, but if I had the choice of either having free will or being incapable of doing anything less than the most morally perfect thing all the time, I'd choose the latter.
Now, the atheist can then point out that in heaven, there is no evil. So is there no free will in heaven? I personally think that such a conclusion would be a mistake. We will have free will in heaven. The atheist can then ask, well, then can you sin in heaven? Different Christians answer differently, but me, speaking for myself, would actually say that, yes, you can sin in heaven. Now, no one ever will sin in all of eternity in heaven, but they have the power to do so. I think that this is the most biblically faithful answer.
Given that no Christian, even after accepting Jesus as their Lord and Savior, fully stops sinning after that point in their lives, why would they suddenly stop in the afterlife?
Satan was in heaven, yet rebelled against God and was cast out. Now, Satan isn't a human, but the closest account that we have of humans in heaven is the paradise of the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were in a heaven on earth scenario, and yet still freely sinned and rebelled against God.
And why did God put the tree of knowledge there in the first place? Being omniscient, he would have known what Adam and Eve were going to do. Even if he wanted them to have free will, why did he make people with the capacity to find sin tempting in the first place? Why didn't he make us such that sin is universally something that we are averse to doing? If we have free will, we have the free will to do things we find unpleasant, so making us such that we find even the prospect of sin universally unpleasant wouldn't compromise our freedom, but it would make sin a lot less common. Instead of making the tree of knowledge with tasty-looking fruit, why didn't God say, Adam, do not eat the stinking cow turd of knowledge?
Okay.
This doesn't even mention all the angels who rebelled against God as well. Now, this raises the question, if we can sin in heaven, how come we won't ever use this power? How can God ensure that we'll never rebel? This question can be answered with Molinism. Molinism is the theology that God knows how any creature would freely act in any scenario. So if I'm in any scenario with factors X, Y, Z influencing me, God knows whether I would sin or whether I would not sin. So God can see the branching possibilities of the future and ensure that only the scenarios we're ever in are ones where we don't sin.
Why doesn't he do that on earth? If he only allows people into heaven who he knows will never use their free will to sin, why doesn't he simply let only those who will never sin be born?
For example, if in heaven the existence of some tree would somehow lead to a chain reaction which eventually leads to me choosing to sin, then God would simply never have created that tree.
So why did he put such a tree in the Garden of Eden?
And he'll be doing this throughout all of eternity, ensuring that no one ever sins or rebels against him.
Well, clearly not all of eternity, since the time we spend on earth is part of eternity. Also, if he does this for people in heaven, why didn't he do it for the angels in heaven? Why did he let angels into heaven who would eventually rebel against him?
Now, the example given is a bit of a silly one, and I don't want you to get the impression that I think that we'll always be on the verge of rebelling against God. I don't think that. This is just an illustration. This raises yet another question. Why doesn't God just do that now and make us all live in a paradise in complete harmony? If he can ensure that we have free will without any sin or evil in heaven, why doesn't he do the same thing on earth? Well, this is just speculation, but here's a possible answer. It may be that if God does not allow any evil or sin on earth, then eventually a point will be reached in heaven where no matter what scenario we're put in, we freely turn towards even greater evil and greater sin.
Why would that be the case? If there can be people who only sin for a few decades on Earth and then never sin again for the rest of eternity, why can't there be people who never sin at all?
However, if God allows for some evil and sin now, then he is able to ensure that for all of eternity that no future sin and evil will ever follow afterwards.
Then he is able to do this? Doesn't that imply that he is otherwise not able to ensure such a thing? Whenever I hear excuses for the existence of evil from apologists, they frequently involve statements like God can't or God isn't able to do such and such a thing. This all-powerful God doesn't have the power to create people who never happen to use their free will to sin.
There is a certain intuition about this idea. If we were created in a perfect state of affairs without ever having known what suffering was, like Adam and Eve, Satan, and all the other demons, we would wonder if the grass were greener on the other side and harden our hearts in rebellion against God and become unreachable to his love.
If it is the case that people have an inclination to sin because of a grass is greener bias, then why not just create us without that bias? I don't see why we can't both have free will and lack a bias that inclines us towards sin.
But if we came into being in a state that we understood to be evil and corrupt, which God then pulled us out of, there would be no desire for us to ever return.
Then why do Christians continue to sin post-conversion? Do those Christians not understand that sin is bad and that avoiding it is better?
Therefore, God would be completely justified in allowing some sin and evil.
That would only be the case if this all-powerful God somehow lacked the power to eliminate sin in any other way.
An atheist might retort, some evil? You mean like the Holocaust, hurricanes, disease, earthquakes, fires, and all that? Yeah, no, that's a little bit more than some evil. Now, in answering, I need to stress that the evils that exist in the world are all terrible and should not be downplayed. However, if Christianity is true, then all humans are immortal, so we need to look at this with an infinite perspective.
Which is totally not downplaying it in any way, shape, or form.
Our universe may continue to exist for billions of years full of evil. If that entire period of time was represented by this line segment, then we need to view that evil in the context of the infinitely long afterlife, in which there will be an infinitely long period of healing marked by joy and perfect love. So if we put on the scales evil of earth and infinite good of heaven, then the scales tip infinitely towards God making our world both the good and the evil.
If reality supposedly contains an all-powerful and perfectly loving God, then no amount of evil, no matter how infinitesimally small, is possible to reconcile with that reality.
Now, the image that this might give you is a God who impersonally balances the checks and sums of pain and pleasures before deciding to create the world. However, in Christianity, God himself took on that pain as well, so that we may have the eternity of pure bliss with him.
Why is it necessary for God to take on that pain in order for us to be absolved? I commonly hear that God cannot let injustice go unpunished, but this implies that God doesn't make the rules. And if he does make the rules, what was the point of making it a rule that the punishment of an innocent person absolves billions of guilty people?
In conclusion, there is free will both in heaven and on earth, but there will be no evil in heaven because we learned our lesson that sin sucks on earth.
Again, if we learn that lesson on Earth, why does no Christian ever stop sinning post-conversion? And why couldn't God have made us born with the knowledge that sin sucks, so we would be born without any inclination to use our free will to sin in the first place? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.